Hey everybody, and welcome to part 6 of my little mini-series where we explore linking performance and incentive pay. This is a more advanced topic in the world of HR. It also brings a lot of concepts from finance over with it to talk about incentive pay, how you pay essentially executives and how to get them to behave in the way that the owner of the business unit or the organization would want them to behave. Okay, this is a big question. It's a very tough question. And this is the end of this series. We're going to wrap up this series in this episode. And if I can get this thing working here. Here we go. Perfect. Okay, so yes, linking performance and incentive pay part 6. You may be interested in this if you are you have any ambition to be an executive yourself. I'm sure if you already are an executive, you already know a lot of this stuff, or you probably have your own strong opinions about it. Anyway, if you own a business, this may be of interest to you also, okay, because this is tackling a very tough problem, which is how do you compensate people for their behavior when you put them in charge of a business operation. Okay, so we're going to get into that today. We have spent the first 5 episodes of this 6-part series talking about what is often done in the real world, why it's done that way, some of the theory behind it, okay, some suspicions as to what we could do. And in this episode, we're going to finally talk about, in my opinion, what we should be doing. Okay, and that's going to take us into talking about value-based performance. Okay, so we're going to talk about value-based performance measures in this episode, how you measure the value of an organization or a business unit. Okay, that's because basically everything is going to be based off of that. Now, just some concepts to get out of the way first. Something I'm going to be talking about a lot is a metric called total business return. Okay, and like I've written here in my notes, total business return is the increase in the value of a business. So if you put someone in charge of a business unit and it has a certain value, you're going to want to see that value increase as a result of the decisions that they make. Okay, so total business return is the increase in the value of the business plus the income or free cash flow that it generates. So all that free cash flow that you're getting from the business. Okay, so that's what I'm defining here as total business return. Okay. Another refresher here. Okay, another concept is return on equity, ROE. Okay, defined it as net income. Okay, or equity. It's a measure. Basically, it's a measure of profitability. Okay, there are many measures of profitability. Return on equity is one of the standard measures of profitability, okay? And just a reminder, because we're talking about equity here, it's assets minus your debt, basically. What that leaves you with is equity. So it's the return on your equity. And another miscellaneous concept to get out of the way here that helps define the toughness of the problem that we're addressing here, okay? And that is that managers can get paid for managing expectations and not just for managing the business. Okay, so very important concept there. Oh, and I have a lingering cough, so you'll have to bear with me. Okay, let's see if I can turn pages here. Perfect. Okay, now to that point, here's a concept that helps put the problem in perspective. Okay, aggressiveness is penalized from an incentive standpoint because aggressive goals simply raise the bar for a given pay opportunity, okay? And this is often seen as unfair. Okay, it's the opposite of what the process is meant to accomplish, okay? And I'm a little bit distracted because I think there's somebody at my door. But let me come back to this here, okay? The point here is that if you set aggressive goals, the likelihood of meeting them goes down, right? Because you have very aggressive goals. Now, the problem with that is that if you set aggressive goals, you could look at this as that's good. You want whoever's in charge to be setting aggressive goals, to be pushing to try and reach for the furthest they could possibly go, right? And you want to encourage this behavior. However, the problem is that when you assign performance-based pay, the problem is if there's a higher likelihood of the manager not achieving the goals, then they will want to shy away from that behavior. They will want to set easily accomplished goals, okay, that aren't really much of a stretch, okay? So you're penalizing aggressiveness by using performance-based pay, okay? If the manager can set the goals, then we see this phenomenon, okay? And that's the problem. Now, incidentally, okay, I included this note here because I've walked and talked this, I've lived this. The corporate budgeting process, in my opinion, is a joke, and I'm not the only one. A Harvard Business Review commentator advocated doing away with the budget process entirely. It's a well-known thing that the corporate budgeting process, it's, how can I put this? It's purported to be based on numbers. We all know that it's not based on numbers. It's based on who the person is and their track record of success. Okay, if you have someone who has a track record of success, you tend to sort of give them what they want. If it's somebody that doesn't have a track record of success, regardless of whatever projections they come up with, regardless of what numbers they're presenting, we tend not to give them what they're requesting. That's a common thing. We all know this. So I advocate for not having super formal budgets. And then that sounds revolutionary, but I learned from the best. And I saw people actually apply this in a mid-sized business, and it worked beautifully. Okay, you evaluate all opportunities on their merits and proceed accordingly, as opposed to sticking to rigorous budgets that are arbitrarily assigned. Now, setting goals based on total business return. Okay, this is where I believe we need to go. Okay, total business return is the value of the business, and we want to reward managers based on if you increase the value of the business. Really, at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for. I don't think a lot of people would give you an argument on that. The problem is how you actually put that into practice. That the execution of that is really where the challenge is. Okay, so just to recap, total business return, TBR, is the valuation of the firm. Okay, the value of the firm, what it's worth, plus the cash flow it generates, or dividends if you're talking about stock. Okay. So the targeted total business return, if you set goals, might assume a level like 15% or 20% per year. If you set a target for the next year, okay, and you would want to set it in terms of percentage, okay, somewhere in the area of 5% would be too low because that's keeping abreast with inflation and the cost of capital. But, something like maybe 10% might be a little too tame. Somewhere in the area of 15 to 20 across the board would probably be a good goal, right? You may not always be able to achieve it depending on circumstances and the industry you're in, but that would be reasonable for most people in most situations, okay? So I believe this is how we should be proceeding. Paying executives, paying managers, especially functional managers or business unit managers, on the total business return and setting goals like in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% per year, okay? You should set targets high and then get rewarded for coming close to them or meeting them, okay? That's how I advocate this should be done. Okay, I think a lot of people would agree with me on that. The problem, of course, is the devil's in the details. How do you actually assess the current total business return and the value and the valuation of the firm right now? There's a lot of intangibles involved, and that's always the challenge, okay? And when you're setting the goals, you would do a standard S-curve that relates, how closely you've come to matching the goals with what the incentive pay should be. Okay, so you get a certain beta or multiple of the goal achieved with pay, basically. Okay, now a great tool for this, especially if you're talking about larger organizations, is phantom stock. Hopefully everybody knows what phantom stock is. That's where you don't actually have shares, or you don't actually have shares where you're looking at their price and they're not fluctuating, but you're sort of regarding, you're taking the total value of the business, you're dividing it by an abstract artificial number of shares that don't actually exist, and you're sort of giving a price for those shares based on the value of the stock. Okay, so it isn't real stock, but if there was stock, this would be how much it would be worth. Okay, that's the idea. So phantom stock. Okay, so in order to do this, if you're going to be compensating people based on the valuation of the business, a great way to do this is to think in terms of phantom stock. Okay, this is particularly useful if you're dealing with firms that are not publicly traded, which is the vast majority of them. Okay, you're not going to have publicly traded share prices and things going up and down on a daily basis. So this is a great way of conceptualizing this. Okay, phantom stock plans. Okay, this is based on the total business return valuation for each business unit. Okay, and you would do this per business unit. You wouldn't do it for the company as a whole, unless the company's in a pure play type situation. Okay, you would do this for each business unit so that you can compare apples to apples and reward people for their progress, not the progress of the entire firm. Okay, and then give options. So the way you would do this, the way to, how can I put this? The way to implement this would be in terms of phantom shares. Okay, phantom stock. You would make multi-year grants, so you would release different amounts of shares at different times, okay, usually a year or so apart, okay? And using annual granting and multi-year vesting, okay, would be the way to go. So you give shares, you grant the shares every year or so, and those shares would take a certain amount of time to become vested, so that there's an incentive for people to have a long-term outlook, and there's an incentive for people to stay with the firm, and there's an incentive for people to make sure that they're adding value that lasts. Okay? That's the idea behind this. Okay, now the big question here, after we've talked about all this stuff about phantom shares and paying people based on the value of the firm, okay, total business return, okay, the big elephant in the room here is how the hell do you actually value a firm, especially when it's not publicly traded, and each business unit might be small, okay, and you've got to be able to do this, and you also have to do it impartially, and you have to be able to do it in such a way that the managers themselves can't influence the valuation. Okay, so that's the big real world challenge here. And depending on what lengths you go to do this, it may or may not be practical, okay, depending on the size of your operation and the costs incurred in actually valuing the business. Depending on what the chartered business valuators say and all the people that are involved in it, there might be a huge margin of error. So the question is, how do you actually implement this? Okay. And once again, that's the big challenge. Now, I'm not going to suggest a particular solution here, okay? If it's a large business unit, there's a lot of money involved, you can afford to get multiple valuations and triangulate between them, okay? You have to make sure that the manager has no direct influence over any of these parties that are doing the valuation, okay? If it's a smaller business, that's when you get some problems. You might not have the ability to get multiple valuations. So, of course, that's where it gets interesting, okay? But anyway, in terms of valuation methods, okay, there's multiple ways of placing a value on a business operation. There's basically three big ones that I advocate for that we would look. And one of them, the first one here, is where you have a marketing index and you add performance-based. So what you do is, like I said here, shares undergo a full valuation annually. So once a year, you bring in the business valuators to value the business, okay? And they go through a traditional appraisal process. They value the business, okay? And you might have more than one of these that triangulate their different values. Values are updated daily based on the movement in an index of industry peers, okay, with new financial data on the company and its peers used to reset valuations on a quarterly basis. Okay, so basically what you're doing here is you have one proper business valuation per year, and then for the rest of the year, you're looking at, industry indexes and things like indices and things like this. Okay, so that allows you to tweak it as the business sort of rises and falls with the economy. Okay, so that's sort of the first way you could do this. Second way is you could use a multiple of EBITDA. Okay, so people use EBITDA as a sort of non-accounting general metric for profitability. Okay, so you could use a multiple of that. That's how they do it in certain industries. You could apply that across the board, or you could simply take the book value. Okay. Which is obviously multiplied by your equity percentage if you have a lot of debt on your books. Okay, so there's different ways of valuing it. These are the three most common that I would look into. Okay, but once again, you would make sure the appraisers and the business valuators are satisfied with how it's done. Okay. Now, some notes here. Performance plans are the other type of long-term incentive plan. So a performance plan, as we've talked about previously, that's where you simply assign a goal and then assign pay based on reaching the goal or reaching close to the goal, okay? You would have a sort of table and assign that. Okay, that's another way of doing this. It's a sort of competing way of doing this. Sometimes it makes sense to do that. Other times it makes sense to do this, okay? And if you are doing the performance plan, you can fix some of the issues with performance plans by doing what I've said here, which is vesting overlapping 3-year cycles for performance plans, okay? You don't want to give someone sort of a lump sum bonus immediately upon completion of a plan, because obviously there won't be long-term incentives involved. It'll encourage all kinds of short-term gain behavior, and we don't want that. Okay, so that's one possible way of making a performance plan work, but still, it's not really, in my opinion, what we should be doing. Okay, and finally, this is my last slide here, just some basic ideas to take us away. CEOs always spend time on unpleasant stuff. I can vouch for this. Today's CEOs must devote considerable time to less enviable tasks of planning layoffs, restructuring operations, closing plants, exiting geographies, eliminating product lines, and getting clients to pay their bills on time. I've had to do all of those except for closing plants. Thank God I haven't been in that situation myself. But yeah, these are typically what people are going to be doing. And, the incentives, how they line up with that stuff, it's very tough to say usually. So it can lead to a lot of strange behaviors and a lot of things that are not on task. Another point, stock exposes its owners to the full spectrum of upside and downside. Okay, this is a common thing that we know in finance, whereas stock options encourage gambling too freely with other people's money. There are some weird accounting rules. We've mentioned this in previous episodes, where stock options do not have to be disclosed in official audited financial statements in a lot of countries, most significantly the US. And so when we pay executives based on stock options, not only does that create a little kind of messed up behavior, because it feels like free money, and you have asymmetric payoffs, where it encourages people to take risks because there's no downside, but there is a possible upside if they win. So it encourages people to engage in very risky behaviors. Okay. Stock itself actually exposes everybody to the upside and the downside. So that's why I encourage people to look at stock, look at share payments, okay, in terms of doing this in incentive structure, and in particular with phantom shares. That's why I think phantom shares or phantom stock works very well, actually, for this application. Okay. And finally, just sort of a context here. Investors have high levels of liquidity and can diversify easily. Losing my voice. Easily. Whereas executives do not. Okay, that's the difference between executives and investors in this context. However, although this has been pointed out, okay, often, executives do have a lot of perks, okay, and they are in the driver's seat for a lot of this, so that tends to compensate for that. And in my opinion, that's as it should be, because I believe that they should not be able to diversify away a lot of the risk involved in their compensation, okay, just by the nature of their job and the responsibility they have. So that's what I have to say. So to sum up for this whole thing, okay, how do you pay managers? Well, the traditional way is with performance plans. Okay, we pay in terms of performance plan. You accomplish this goal and you get this pay, right? If you work in larger organizations, something a little higher scale than what I've ever done, you're paid in stock, and then you're paid in stock options, okay? And that encourages some pretty interesting behavior, okay? Not necessarily in the interests of the owners or the shareholders, and it comes with a lot of problems. So what I advocate for is, instead of simply assigning performance-based goals, and instead of granting stock options and stock payments, I advocate for valuing the business on its total value at this moment and basing incentive pay on growing the value of that business. Okay? That kills several birds with one stone. It allows the incentives of the managers to align with owners and shareholders. It sets you up for long-term success. It discourages short-term thinking and short-term behavior. It discourages asymmetric payoffs. And it discourages a lot of overly risk-averse behavior on the other side. Okay, so it aligns that. The challenge is being able to do this accurately, because as we all know, it's very hard to appraise a business accurately. And there could also be room for manipulation of the valuation if the managers in question have a relationship of some kind with the valuators and the appraisers. That's the problem there. If you have valuators that have some kind of agenda, they're skewing the numbers, that also can be a liability for this approach. But all things being equal, I think that this method will produce better results, especially in smaller companies or mid-sized companies that are not publicly traded. Especially if you're in a very stable or mature industry, I think that this is the way to go. So hopefully that makes sense. Thank you very much for tuning in. You guys are awesome. Let me know if you have any questions. And thank you for tuning into the series. It's taken me something like over a year to complete this series, so I'm glad it's finally done. Thank you so much. Take care.